It started as a stupid idea, a harmless prank among friends during a weekend trip to an old, abandoned cabin deep in the woods, a place where cell phone reception was non-existent, the forest around it unnervingly quiet, and the trees cast twisted, claw-like shadows under the pale moonlight. And we thought it would be funny to scare one of our friends by sneaking into his room at night, making noises and moving objects to convince him the place was haunted. But what began as laughter and whispered plotting quickly spiraled into a nightmare I'll never forget. That first night, around midnight, we crept down the creaking wooden stairs, flashlight beams darting across peeling wallpaper and dust-covered furniture, hearts racing with excitement and a little fear. And as we reached the hallway, we heard it, a low, wet gurgling sound coming from the corner of the room, slow and deliberate, something that wasn't our friend, something not human, and my blood ran cold, the laughter dying in my throat as I realized everyone else had gone silent, frozen in place, the prank completely forgotten. The gurgling grew louder, echoing through the walls, circling us, and I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a tall, shadowy figure standing against the far wall, limbs bending in impossible ways, head tilting unnaturally, watching us, studying us, and when I screamed, it vanished, leaving only the sound of our own ragged breaths in the suffocating darkness. And moments later, the floor above us groaned as though something heavy was walking across the ceiling. Down the stairs we had just descended, yet when we dared to run upstairs, the room was empty, untouched, and our friend was still asleep, completely unaware. Panic set in, and we bolted outside into the freezing night, stumbling through thick underbrush, hearts hammering, flashlights flickering. And though the forest was eerily silent, I could feel something gliding just beyond our vision, patient, deliberate, following. And every time we glanced back, nothing was there. Yet the shadows seemed wrong, elongated, moving as if alive, whispering in the wind, things we couldn't understand. By dawn, exhausted and terrified, we returned to the cabin, and that's when we noticed the scratches on the wooden siding, deep and jagged, smeared with something dark that defied identification. Claw marks as if whatever had haunted the night was trying to leave a message, or maybe mark us. And when we laughed nervously later, pretending it was part of our prank, I knew the truth. We had awakened something in those woods, something patient, something that had been waiting for foolish people like us, something that followed us back into our homes, into the shadows of our everyday lives, silent, unseen, but always there. And even now, months later, when I hear the wind rustle the trees or see shadows stretching too long at night, I feel its presence watching me, waiting. Because what started as a simple prank didn't end with laughter. It ended with terror, and it's a terror that never truly leaves. It started as a joke, something my friends and I thought would be funny during our college years. A harmless prank on the quietest kid in our dorm, the kind of guy who kept to himself and never bothered anyone. And our plan was simple. We would hide in the basement, wait until he returned from the library at night, and use walkie-talkies to make strange noises, creaks, and whispers so he'd think the building was haunted. But what we didn't anticipate was how real it would feel once it started. That night, around 1 a.m., we hid behind the dusty boxes in the basement storage room, flashlights dimmed, giggling quietly at how scared he would be. And at first, everything went according to plan. We heard his footsteps echoing through the empty halls, the soft click of his keys as he unlocked the basement door, and then we began to make noises, whispers, soft thuds, and low growls, watching through a crack as he froze mid-step, eyes wide, breathing quick, and my friends and I laughed quietly, thinking the prank was a total success, until he turned toward us, not in fear, but with a strange blank expression, staring directly at the boxes we were hiding behind. And I swear his eyes weren't normal. They were darker, deeper, almost hollow, and a voice that wasn't his, low and guttural, whispered, "I see you," though only he had been standing there. Our laughter died immediately as the basement lights flickered violently, plunging us into darkness, and the air grew impossibly cold, heavy, as though something had entered with him, pressing against our chests, and we felt it before we saw it, shadows moving in unnatural ways, stretching along the walls, crawling along the ceiling, as if the building itself were alive, watching, waiting. The sound of footsteps circled around us, slow and deliberate, though none of us dared move, paralyzed with terror, and the whispers grew louder, repeating words we didn't understand, echoing from every corner. And when we finally screamed, the lights flickered back on, and the basement was empty. Our friend was gone, vanished, leaving nothing but the echo of soft, unnatural laughter that wasn't human, and footprints that didn't belong to him appeared in the dust, deep and jagged, circling where we had hidden, as though marking us. We searched the building frantically, calling his name, but no one answered, and when the night ended, he was never found. No one believed us when we tried to explain, and even now, years later, every time I enter a basement, hear footsteps in an empty corridor, or feel eyes watching from the shadows, I remember that night, and I know that our prank didn't just scare someone. It awakened something patient and malicious, something that still lingers, waiting for the next foolish person to play its game. And I shiver every time I hear a whisper in the dark, because I know it's still there. It all started as a joke during a weekend sleepover at my friend's old family cabin, a creaky, isolated structure deep in the woods, the kind of place where even in the daytime the silence was heavy. But at night, it became suffocating, broken only by the occasional groan of the wooden floors, the wind rattling the shutters, and the rustle of leaves outside. And the plan seemed simple. We would scare my friend, Jason, by moving around the house, making noises, whispering, and subtly shifting objects while he slept, thinking it would be funny when he woke up screaming. But what began as playful teasing quickly turned into a nightmare I will never forget. That first night, around midnight, we crept through the shadowed hallways with flashlights barely illuminating peeling wallpaper, dusty furniture, and broken floorboards. And as we tapped on walls and whispered his name, I noticed the temperature drop suddenly, a heavy, cold weight pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. And the shadows along the walls seemed to stretch unnaturally, crawling, twisting as if alive, reaching toward us every time we blinked. At first, we laughed nervously, trying to convince ourselves it was just our imagination or the thrill of the prank. But the tapping and whispers became deliberate, echoing in rhythm, almost like they were responding to us. And then, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. A dark figure standing at the end of the hallway, completely still, limbs bent at impossible angles, head tilted as though studying us. And every time I blinked, it was closer, closer still, gliding forward silently, not like a person, but like a shadow with purpose. Panic overtook us, and we scrambled to leave the hallway. But the door slammed shut with an unseen force, and the whispers escalated into guttural, unintelligible words, repeating our names in a low, rasping tone that made my stomach twist in fear, while the air itself seemed to pulse with a presence I couldn't see, heavy and oppressive, forcing me to move despite my legs shaking uncontrollably. Over the next several minutes, the figure moved toward each of us in turn, but whenever anyone turned to confront it, it vanished, only to reappear somewhere else. And every shadow in the cabin seemed to slither, stretch, and curl unnaturally, echoing with the whispers, the low thuds of movement following our own steps, as if anticipating them. And the once familiar creaks of the old cabin became sinister, deliberate, like footsteps tracking us from unseen corners. By the time I bolted toward the main door, the cabin seemed alive, twisting, corridors elongating beyond their normal dimensions, objects moving on their own, floorboards groaning under weight that wasn't there. And when I finally tore the door open, the cold wind outside hit me like a physical blow. But instead of relief, I felt the same oppressive presence pressing against me, the whispers brushing my ears from the darkness behind me. And when I turned, the figure stood at the top of the stairs, grinning impossibly wide, eyes hollow and black, tilting its head as it whispered a single word, "Stay," and I blacked out. I awoke hours later outside the cabin, alone, in the pre-dawn cold. My friends gone, the front door swinging in the wind, yet I could feel it following me, lingering in the shadows, patient and silent, its presence now stitched into my every step. And over the following nights, I began experiencing the aftermath, tapping on walls at home when no one was there, whispers coming from empty rooms, fleeting shadows in the corners of my vision, the feeling of cold breath on my neck while I slept, and every time I returned to the woods, the cabin loomed in my memory as a living entity, waiting, watching, patient. And I realized with crushing certainty that our prank hadn't ended with laughter. It had awakened something far older, far darker, far more patient than we could have imagined, something that remembered my name, my fear, and that continues to follow me, waiting for the next time I foolishly thought it was just a joke.